Anyone else just wait for Friday so that they can watch the episode of The Mandalorian? Because honestly, same. Probably one of the only good things about 2020. Another week, another episode of The Mandalorian Season 2. Frog Lady has her eggs, Mando has Baby Yoda, they're off on an adventure. Let's talk about it. As always, I'm going to be going non-spoiler and then spoiler, and I will clearly mark out where the spoiler section starts, so if you haven't seen the episode of The Mandalorian, I'll clearly mark out for you when the non-spoiler section ends and the spoiler section begins. And also, as always, I know I'm reusing footage from the same 4 trailers, but sorry, Disney didn't give me a lot to work with, so bear with me. Let's talk about the episode entitled The Heiress. Okay, so like I mentioned in last week's video, this episode's a little bit different. We knew that going into this episode because, unlike a lot of the other episodes of The Mandalorian where you don't really know where the next episode's going to go because of the standalone nature of each episode, we sort of knew the direction of this episode. Or at the very least, we could make our best guesses, right? Mando saves Frog Lady, they have an adventure with cave spiders, and then they're off to deliver the eggs to Trask. So we at least knew sort of going into the episode what we were in for. However, I will say there are plenty of surprises, as always, in each episode of The Mandalorian, and this episode is no different. So if you're worried that, oh, well, we kind of know where the story's going, well, trust me, you do, but then you don't. And then you do and you don't. Again, I can't talk about the story in detail without giving away spoilers, and I won't in this section, but I will say the general story of this episode was pretty okay. Now, I've said this time and time again. I'm not a huge fan of the shorter episodes of The Mandalorian, like the 20 to 40 minute episodes. I'd much rather them be 45, 50, 55, an hour, but I digress. Because if you shorten the episode length, then you run the risk of just making it feel way too quick or way too slow because you're trying to fill time. And what I mean by that is often the shorter episodes are just filler. They're just filling up time. So it's a delicate balance of trying to cram in this entire story while trying to make sure it doesn't feel like it's entirely filler. And again, this episode of Mandalorian is not necessarily filler. It doesn't necessarily do everything that I wanted it to, though, to advance the story forward, but it's getting there. Again, without giving away any spoilers, last season I felt like it really picked up at episodes 7 and 8, and obviously that was just way too late. This time around, I feel like it has a really good chance of picking up next episode and just carrying the story through the rest of the season. I could be wrong, but I'm really hoping. Now, the director of this episode was Bryce Dallas Howard, who directed episode 4 of last season. A lot of people really liked that, and really liked how it was very standalone and didn't need to fit into the larger story. It was just Mando on the sort of village planet training the villagers to fight with Gina Carano's Cara Dune. Personally, and as you guys know, I'm a huge story person. I wasn't a big fan of that episode. It was one of my least favorites of last season, but I digress. However, I will say, when watching this entire episode, I had one director in mind for who I thought directed this episode. And it wasn't Bryce Dallas Howard. Last episode, I knew immediately that it was Peyton Reed. Granted, I knew he was directing an episode of The Mandalorian Season 2, so I knew that going into it at least, but as soon as the episode started, I went, it's either Taika or Peyton, and as the episode went on, I knew it was Peyton. This episode, I thought it is X person. It has to be X person because of X, Y, and Z. Again, I can't go into details because of spoilers, but it turned out it was Bryce Dallas Howard. So in that regard, good job, maybe? This episode didn't really have a flair to it, which I guess is a good thing, and I guess it does make sense that it's Bryce Dallas Howard because she's a really relatively new director, so I get that. And on one hand, it's a good thing because you really get to focus on the story and the characters rather than the amazing directing or the subpar directing. On the other hand, this episode kind of felt run-of-the-mill at certain points. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, just it is what it is. There are things in this episode that will make Star Wars fans really, really happy. I am positive of that. Unlike episode 1, where I thought, maybe some fans wouldn't be as happy with Boba Fett returning or Timothy Olyphant taking the armor, this episode I am positive if you are a huge fan of Star Wars, you are going to be super happy with a lot of different things that they do in this episode. And unlike the previous 2 episodes, what this episode does well is it sets up the future of the season really nicely. The previous 2 episodes were going on and on about, finding Mandalorians that'll lead me to Jedi, but getting distracted at a crate dragon and giant cave spiders. And while this episode did meander a little bit, it also did a lot to really cement what the season is going to be for the next 5 episodes. You get some really nice hints and nods, not in a very forced way, in a very, very organic way, as to what the rest of the season is going to look like, and I'm really happy about that. Okay, maybe one of those hints and nods wasn't so subtle, was pretty out there, and I was kind of surprised that they just said it, but whatever. Regardless, it was cool. But again, I keep going back to this point. This episode didn't really feel essential to the overall story. Listen, if you just want to turn on 35 minutes of The Mandalorian and have a good time, go for it. This episode will do you just fine. If you want to watch 50 minutes of some great Mandalorian, turn on episode 1. If If you want to watch Goosebumps turn into The Mandalorian, watch episode 2. Fine. If you want to watch Seven Samurai in the Mandalorian form, watch episode 4 of last season. This episode just didn't feel like anything. And that's okay, I guess. It's setting up a lot of really interesting things to come, but the story within these 35 minutes, it just didn't feel like anything. It did promise us some really good things, but at the end of the day, it was fine. It was good. 35 minutes of enjoyable content. That's all I can say about it. It wasn't nearly as bizarre as last episode. It was pretty generic in all the right ways. It was a lot of The Mandalorian that people love, and that's a good thing. But for me personally, who didn't love season 1, I'm just waiting for the moment where it gets elevated to the next level, and I have hope that it's going to happen with the next couple episodes. No promises from them, but I'm hoping. So I'm going to give season 2, episode 3, chapter 11 of The Mandalorian a B and a 7.5 out of 10. Okay, spoiler section in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Final warning, here we go. Okay, so Bo-Katan. I mean, we all knew she was going to be in the show, right? And here she is. Katie Sackhoff reprising her role from the Clone Wars and Rebels, and I thought it was great. It makes a lot of sense that she's in the show because this is what I was alluding to before. It sets up the story moving forward. You now have this object, the Darksaber, that's become a MacGuffin all of a sudden. And that's a really good thing, because before the Darksaber was like, oh, Giancarlo Esposito's Moff Gideon has the Darksaber. Great. But now all of a sudden it becomes an object of interest, like an Infinity Stone, for example. And so having Bo-Katan want to get the Darksaber is going to set up inherent conflict, and that's really good. That's really good storytelling. I thought she and her crew of the Mandalorians were pretty cool, and I did like how the aesthetic design of Mando's armor was much more shiny, and you could tell who he was amidst the squad of Mandalorians firing at stormtroopers. By the way, good jab at stormtroopers not being able to hit anything. That was good. But like I said before, the action wasn't all that spectacular. It was pretty run-of-the-mill. And going back to what I said before, I was 100%, 1000% convinced the entire episode that it was directed by Dave Filoni. I was wrong. Bryce Dallas Howard. Because look, everything's there. The introduction of major Clone Wars characters, which I thought totally Dave Filoni. Sort of a run-of-the-mill directing style. Dave Filoni, he's a pretty new director to live action. And just an okay 35-ish minute episode. Dave Filoni. Not saying he's a bad director, just the episodes he directed last season were okay. They were fine. Look, this episode felt like a very good episode of Clone Wars. That's why I thought it was Dave Filoni the entire time. Aside from all the Clone Wars characters and all of that, that's probably the main reason why. This felt like a good episode of Clone Wars. Unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a great episode of The Mandalorian. It's good, but it's not that great because look, the Clone Wars, you can afford to have some episodes where it's more filler. That's fine because you have 3, 4, 5 episodes dedicated to an arc. You have 20-some episodes per season. That's fine. Here we got 8 episodes. Only 8. That's what frustrates me a little bit. We know what the overall story is. Find the Mandalorians, find the Jedi, find Ahsoka, Darksaber. We get it now. But the pattern has been for all 3 of the first episodes. I know someone who can get you there, but first you gotta do this. Okay, I know someone who can get you there, but first you gotta do this. I know someone who can get you there, but first you gotta do this. I bet you next episode he's gonna get to that planet where Ahsoka is, and somebody's gonna be like, I know where she is, but you gotta do this first, and you don't see her until the very last shot of the episode. I bet that's what's gonna happen. It's just getting a little frustrating, honestly. Maybe that's just me. Maybe it's literally just me. But I'm a little frustrated because I just want to get to the story, and we haven't really gotten there yet. We're starting to, but it's episode 4 next week, the halfway point. And maybe that's why I liked episode 1 so much, because it was longer. At least if you're going to have a standalone story, just make it 50 minutes. Go for it. Have a standalone story that's worth 50 minutes of your time. Shorter doesn't necessarily mean better. This episode suffered, I think, in large part because it was just short. The episode didn't really have time to get its bearings, land on its feet, and just go. It had to set up a few things, and then it was sort of starting to take off, and then it ended. A couple other things that I wanted to mention before I close out this video. One, I was a little surprised that they just mentioned Ahsoka Tano like that. I thought it would have been a little smoother if Bo-Katan just went, I have a friend, named Fulcrum even, if you wanted to really go there for the Rebels fans, but I know a Jedi. She helped me out during the Clone Wars. Go to this planet, find her. Because what that would have done is it would have appeased all the fans of Clone Wars and Rebels who knew Ahsoka, and it would also have created some intrigue for those small group of people who'd had no idea who Ahsoka was, because they'd be like, oh, who's this? Some Jedi. I digress. We know Ahsoka's going to be coming soon. That's confirmed. That's great. I don't know if I wanted to see her sooner or at the end of this episode, but anyways. And then one really interesting thing about the canon of Star Wars that I think this episode did is establish where Din Djarin is actually from, or rather, what faction of the Mandalorians he is a part of. Because that's actually something that I had never thought of before. I knew obviously from watching Clone Wars and Rebels that there were Death Watch, Night Owls, etc. But I never really thought about, well, what is this faction of Mandalorians that were living on Navarro? So I actually think it's a really interesting thing that Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni presumably did in making Din Djarin part of Death Watch, presumably, or at least the Children of the Watch, because as we know from Clone Wars, Death Watch, not good. And, at one point, led by Darth Maul. I know he's dead at this time, but anyways, just something interesting to think about. I thought it was a very nice touch. And I guess finally, nice to see Moff Gideon, but can we see more of him, actually? And I'm sure we will. We're going to see more of Bo-Katan for sure, because she's going after the Darksaber, and I'm positive that Moff Gideon is going to come back, so maybe more than a hologram this time? I'm sure Giancarlo Esposito is getting sick of just showing up in one episode of each season in like the last shot. Bottom line, I thought this episode was fine. I am much more excited for next episode, just hopefully seeing Ahsoka, although I am worried. Again, like I mentioned before, I'm worried they're going to sidetrack the episode, and it's going to be someone like, I know where Ahsoka is, but first you got to do this for me, and then we don't see her until the end, and on until the season's over. I just don't want that to happen. I hope it doesn't, but we'll have to see. So those were my thoughts on Episode 3, Chapter 11 of Season 2 of The Mandalorian. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. If you guys like this video, make sure to subscribe and give this video a like. And if you want to check out some more videos, check out the videos on the screen right now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.